There are places where time does not move forward, where the past did not become history, but simply remained in the dust of roads, in the shadows of destroyed walls, in cold houses where voices once sounded. They were not touched by oblivion. They simply exhaled and froze. Sometimes it seems that if you take a step, you will hear a door slam somewhere around the corner, a cartwheel creaking, or the wind bringing a fragment of a song. But no one will come forward to meet you. These cities and villages did not die. They simply stopped. The world around is in a hurry, changing faces, erasing traces, building a new one on top of the old. But there are points on the map where everything went differently. Here, time refused to obey and turned into fog, into sand, into rust and salt, preserving every detail, as if someone wanted us to someday return and see what happens when life stops flowing. These places do not belong to the past. They exist between worlds. Their walls are memories, and silence is voices that no one will hear again. Therefore, on this journey we will go to where time stood still, to cities, villages, and shrines, where life once froze and never moved on. In a valley at an altitude of more than 2,000 meters above sea level lies Teotihuacan, the place that the ancients called where the gods are born. Here, among the dry wind, stone, and light, a man once built a city to reach the sky. But as soon as he achieved this, the city fell silent, and the silence lasted for more than 1,000 years. The Teotihuacan Valley extends northeast of modern Mexico City. From above, it looks like a giant plain. The lines of the streets form ideal axes, and the buildings are located with mathematical precision. The central road, which the later Aztecs would call the Road of the Dead, stretches for several kilometers, connecting three main monuments: the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. All this creates the feeling that the city was not conceived by people, but by forces thinking on a cosmic scale. Archaeologists still don't know who built Teotihuacan. By the time the Aztecs arrived here in the 14th century, it had already been abandoned and destroyed. They decided that the gods themselves had built it, and gave it a name meaning the place where the gods are born. But even without the name of its builders, the city speaks for itself. Radiocarbon dating shows that it arose around the beginning of the 1st century AD and quickly grew into one of the largest centers of the ancient world, with an estimated population of over 100,000 people. The Pyramid of the Sun is the central point of the city. Its height exceeds 70 meters, and its base is almost equal to the Egyptian Pyramid of Cheops. The builders used millions of tons of stone and earth to create a structure that was resistant to time and earthquakes. Recent studies have shown that its base is oriented precisely to the sunset point on the summer solstice, and the internal tunnels lead to an underground chamber where archaeologists have found traces of mercury and microscopic particles of minerals that reflect light. All this points to the ritual, possibly astronomical purpose of the pyramid. The Pyramid of the Moon, located at the northern end of the Road of the Dead, faces the mountains. Its upper platform overlooks the entire valley, and it probably served as a place for ceremonies related to celestial cycles and sacrifices. Under it, many burials were found: warriors, priests, animals, built with impeccable symmetry. These are not just burials. These are ritual theaters, where death became a continuation of life and blood became a reminder of the movement of the sun. The city itself was thought out with unprecedented precision. Canals, residential areas, squares, everything is subject to a strict geometric plan. Each line carries a symbolic meaning. Some researchers believe that the layout of Teotihuacan reproduces the model of the universe. The Pyramid of the Sun is the center of the world. The Road of the Dead is the axis connecting heaven and earth. Even the relationships between structures correspond to the movements of the planets, especially Venus, which the Mesoamericans revered as the celestial embodiment of the cycle of life and death. But the most mysterious thing about Teotihuacan is its end. Around the 8th century, the city was deserted. There are almost no traces of war, but there is evidence of fires, especially in the temple areas. Researchers suggest that the inhabitants themselves burned down their sanctuaries, perhaps as a sign of the end of an era or the abandonment of the old gods. It was not a collapse, but a ritual, an attempt to return time to the beginning. After this, the valley remained silent for almost 1,000 years. Only the wind passed through the ancient streets, raising dust that settled on the stones, like a memory. When the Aztecs found these ruins, they did not rebuild them. They only added their own legends, believing that the world began here. Modern archaeology is discovering new levels of this city. Using ground-penetrating radar, tunnels were discovered underground, extending for tens of meters, filled with shiny particles of pyrite and hematite. When light hits it, the walls flare up, like stars underground. Scientists believe that these galleries symbolize the underground path to the afterlife, the road along which the souls of deceased rulers walked. Today, Teotihuacan remains a place where the past breathes. At dawn, the sun slowly rises above the Pyramid of the Moon, and long shadows fall on the Road of the Dead. Tourists walk along the same path that the priests once walked, not realizing that every step repeats a ritual 1,000 years ago. Stones heated by the sun retain the warmth of centuries, and in this warmth one feels a strange calm, as if time here does not move, but pulsates, returning to itself. Teotihuacan does not belong to the past. It exists outside of time, like a frozen point in human history, where architecture turned into prayer and silence into language. Looking at its pyramids, it is impossible not to feel that here a person once tried to talk to eternity and she answered. If time is frozen in stone in the majestic pyramids of Teotihuacan, then in the heart of the Namibian desert, it turns to sand. There, among the dunes whose waves move with the slow solemnity of eternity, lies Kolmanskop, a city that did not die, but dissolved. Its streets are now drowning in sand, like a memory gradually disappearing from the human mind. Every building, every arch and staircase is a trace of the moment when civilization first realized that nature does not take by force, it simply waits. Kolmanskop was born suddenly, like a mirage. At the beginning of the 20th century, a German railway worker found a diamond in these places, accidentally picking it up from the sand. The discovery changed everything. In a matter of months, engineers, prospectors, and adventurers poured here, and a city worthy of Europe grew up on bare land. Houses with stained glass windows and verandas, a theater, a hospital, a power plant, a school, and even a casino. All this arose among the lifeless dunes, as if people were trying to deceive geography itself. The city has become a symbol of human confidence, that civilization is capable of subjugating even the desert. For several decades, Kolmanskop flourished. Diamonds were found right on the surface, and at night their light reflected in the moonlight, as if the earth itself was shining with greed. The villas were decorated by German merchants. Furniture, porcelain, and tools were brought from Europe. Even water, which was not available here, was transported by rail from afar to maintain the illusion of stability. But the illusion cannot last forever. When the diamond deposits were depleted and new deposits were discovered further south, the flow of people dried up. The city was empty almost instantly. The desert was just waiting for the moment when the last light went out in the houses. The sand began to slowly enter inside, like water into a crack. First he lay down at the doorsteps, then climbed the stairs, made his way into the rooms, lay down on the bed, on the piano, on the teaching boards. He didn't destroy, he just filled the void. The houses were filled with golden light and silence. Thus began the transformation of Kolmanskop into a city where time ceased to be linear. Here everything happens at the same time. The wind carries sand, The doors open slightly, and it seems as if someone has just passed in the next room. Archaeologists and researchers call Kolmanskop a ghost town, but this is not entirely true. Ghosts are what leaves, but Kolmanskop remains. Its buildings stand just like in the photographs, only now their walls are covered with soft waves of sand. Sometimes the dune rises to the level of the roof, and after a few years it falls, revealing what was hidden. Every year the landscape changes, but the city remains, as if the breath of the desert moves it slower than human time can notice. Scientists studying the influence of climate on architecture often come here. They say Kolmanskop is a perfect example of how nature is reclaiming space. The temperature inside the houses remains almost constant, and the sand acts as a filter, protecting wood and paint from destruction. The fact itself is paradoxical. The more the desert takes, the longer the city lives. Today, Kolmanskop is protected as a historical monument. Tourists can enter a few buildings, but most of the city is closed. The wind there is too strong, and the dunes move faster than people can clear the passages. When you go inside one of the houses, you feel not like a guest, but like a sleep intruder. The silence is so dense that it seems that the air itself holds memories. Light falls through cracks in the shutters, and the dust dances as if time is learning to breathe. Kolmanskop is not just a city abandoned by people. This is a living example of how oblivion can be beautiful. The desert did not destroy it. It turned it into a work of art, into the slow breathing of the planet. Here, man and nature finally came to a balance. The first created, the second preserved. When in the deserts of Namibia, memory disintegrates into grains of sand and light, in the heart of Europe, it freezes in iron, soot, and silence. Among the soft hills of the Limousin lies Oradour-sur-Glane, a place where one day did not pass and become a thing of the past, but remained hanging over the streets turned into a motionless stream. Here time does not move forward, because its entire supply was exhausted in a few hours, and the earth, saturated with fire, refused to take the next step. On June 10th, 1944, when the expectation of liberation had already penetrated the villages and towns of France, a detachment of SS men from the Das Reich Division entered Oradour. The formal pretext was to search for the underground, but reality turned out to be stricter than any formulation. The men were herded into the square and into barns. The women and children were locked in the church. Then the sequential destruction began. Queues, arson, finishing off with fire where there were survivors. In the afternoon, all that was left of Oradour were walls, bones, coal, and air in which the smell of burning had been absorbed into the lime and wood. More than 600 residents died, including hundreds of children. It was not a block or a street that disappeared, but an entire community with its voices, habits, and names. When the occupation ended, the country chose preservation rather than construction. A new village was built nearby, and they decided to leave the old village in the position in which the silence found it. This is how a landscape of memory appeared, created not by architects, but by stopped time. Tram rails disappear into the grass, bicycles with bent spokes rust along the facades, stoves and beds stick out from the charred boxes of houses, store signs are barely legible under a layer of red crust. The bullets left a pattern on the walls that shows the trajectory of violence, and each hole became a sign that cannot be restored. The state declared the ruins a national memorial, but the meaning of protection here is unusual. Not to restore, but to keep the destruction in its primary form. Restorers strengthen the masonry so that it does not crumble, but they do not polish the metal, do not cover up the soot, and do not remove from the houses objects left where life was cut short. Even the ash mixed with the soil is considered part of the exhibition because it preserves the structure of a day that has not ended. For historians, this is a rare example of material recording of a tragedy on the scale of an entire village fabric. There are no showcases or signatures here because the space itself becomes the exhibit. Empty window openings, burnt beams, shoe prints in hardened dirt, lines of rails leading to nowhere. For psychologists, it is an embodied collective mourning in which the gesture of silence is transformed into an urban form. A person entering the street unconsciously slows down, takes a breath, looks away from the black walls because any sound seems too loud for this acoustics. Oradour-sur-Glane is valuable not only as evidence of a crime, but also as an experience of resistance to oblivion. The refusal to restore deprived time of its usual smoothing mechanism. There was no new decoration, no fresh plaster, no paint to cover the scars. On the contrary, grass roots and moss consolidated the destruction as a form, making it part of the landscape, where nature does not erase the trace, but emphasizes it with soft lines of greenery. Every year, school children, researchers, and travelers come here to walk along the streets turned into corridors of memory. They see chapel walls without a roof. They see car bodies growing into the ground. They see stoves that will never warm the house. Above all this stands the clear Limousin light, neither dazzling nor festive, calm, like the gaze of a witness who no longer argues or convinces. Oradour-sur-Glane is not a museum hall or a ruin of antiquity. This is an entire human environment, stopped at the moment of violence and preserved as evidence. Here the past is not pushed aside, it coexists with the present, and every step on these stones turns into an act of memory. While the grass grows between the rails and the rust quietly deepens its color, the day of June of 1944 remains the present time of this place, a time that no longer passes, but does not lose its strength. While Europe preserves its memory in ashes and stone, India does it differently, in the living fabric of time. Among the emerald hills of Himachal Pradesh, where mist falls on the tea plantations, and the air smells of mangoes and damp clay, lies old Pragpur, a place where the past does not stand still, but continues, as if time here flows on a different axis. At first glance, it is a simple village, but take a few steps inside, and you feel like you have crossed the border between centuries. History is not played out here. History is lived here. Every stone, every door, every bend of the alley breathes the memory of those who built, loved, and worked here hundreds of years ago. Pragpur arose in the 17th century when wealthy trading families that linked Kashmir with Punjab decided to settle in the fertile valley at the foot of the mountains. They built their houses from stone and wood, choosing materials that could be found nearby. The walls were covered with lime plaster, painted with natural pigments, ochre, clay, vegetable dyes. The craftsmanship was passed down from generation to generation, and therefore, even after centuries, no two identical houses can be found in the village. The narrow lanes are woven together like the threads of a carpet, and at their center is a pond called Tol, the sacred heart of Pragpur. Its water is calm, like a mirror, and it reflects old temples, granite stairs, and trees planted by the first settlers. The village has amazingly preserved not only its architecture, but also the very rhythm of life. There is no rush, no car noise, no advertising or bright signs. People wake up at dawn, open their shutters, and greet the day as their ancestors did. Women go to wells for water with clay jugs. Men repair tools or work in workshops. The sounds here are soft and measured, the clink of copper, the ticking of a hand loom, the distant cry of a rooster. All this creates the feeling that time is not moving forward, but is simply circling in a circle. At the end of the 20th century, the government of India awarded Old Pragpur the status of the first historic heritage village. This means that its appearance, traditions, and way of life are protected by law. But the main thing is that the inhabitants themselves became the guardians of their world. The elders ensure that no one rebuilds houses with concrete blocks, installs satellite dishes, or destroys wooden balconies and carved shutters. All repair work here is done using old technologies. No plastic, no cement, only wood, stone, and lime. Even the paints are mixed by hand, as they did 100 years ago. Archaeologists and ethnographers call Pragpur a living museum, but this definition is not entirely correct. Unlike museums, there is no boundary between the exhibit and life. People continue to live in houses that are several centuries old, celebrate ancient rituals, weave fabrics, and make pottery. Every yard is a workshop. Every street is living history. They are not trying to bring back the past. It just hasn't gone away. Travelers say that the presence of time is especially acute in Pragpur. It does not press or disturb, but as if it lives nearby. At noon, when the sun falls on the ochre walls, everything around seems to be filled with soft gold. Shadows move along the steps, along the railings, along the wrought iron bars, and it seems that they carry the breath of past generations. In the evenings, when the lamps are lit in the houses, the light falls on the stones in such a way as if it illuminates not the night, but the past itself. Scholars studying Pragpur note a remarkable balance between tradition and life. In other places, the past is protected by walls, but here it is protected by habit, simple, everyday, without pathos. In every gesture, in every detail, there is respect for what was. Pragpur shows that conservation is not freezing but a natural continuation. Time is not an enemy here, but an ally. It lives with people, calmly, leisurely, like an old neighbor with whom you can sit silently on the threshold and watch the sun set behind the hills. When you enter the central square, you feel the smell of incense, earth, and wood smoke mixing in the air. Around there are houses with carved arches and windows decorated with colored glass. No one is in a hurry here. It seems that life itself flows more slowly, like a stream not rushing to the sea. And perhaps this is precisely the secret of Pragpur. It does not fight against time, does not seek to stop it. He just let him stay close. Old Pragpur is not a village of the past, but a living proof that time cannot be wasted if one lives in harmony with it. There are no museums here, because the whole village is a museum. There are no tour guides, because every resident is a custodian. And when you stand on the stone steps by the pond, where the water reflects the sunset and the first stars, you understand. Time can really be kind if you don't rush it. When in old Pragpur time breathes softly and calmly, in Pripyat it froze, like clear air after a thunderstorm, where neither wind nor sound dare to disturb the peace. This city did not collapse and did not age. It simply stopped, like a film stuck in one frame. Among the birches that grew on the streets where laughter once sounded, there are concrete skeletons of houses, and in the windows where the lights were on, now only the sky is reflected. Here, in the heart of Polisi, in the shadow of abandoned high-rise buildings, time stopped passing on the night when a person crossed the line of what was permitted. Pripyat was young. Its history lasted less than 2 decades. It was built with the optimism of an era when it seemed that science and work could conquer everything. The city was built for workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, for engineers, power engineers, doctors, and builders. It was supposed to become a model of the Soviet future, a city where everyone knew their place and believed in the future. Wide avenues, neat neighborhoods, sports grounds, schools, clinics, the Prometheus cinema, and a park with a new Ferris wheel. All this embodied the confidence that progress is irreversible. In the spring of 1986, they were preparing for the May Day holidays. There were garlands and flags in shop windows. Parade rehearsals were held at the stadium, and wall newspapers were decorated in schools. People lived as usual. They bought bread, read newspapers, walked along the embankment. There were no signs of trouble, but on the night from the 25th to the 26th of April, an explosion occurred at the Chernobyl station, an event that changed not only the fate of the city but also the course of world history. When the reactor of the 4th power unit exploded, a glow rose above it, violet, quiet, deceptively beautiful. No one yet knew that this light was deadly. People went out onto their balconies and watched him without feeling any danger. The radioactive cloud was already rising into the sky, settling on the roofs, trees, and people standing below. At dawn, the streets looked just as peaceful, but there was already something in the air that was not visible. Particles of decay, invisible death spreading throughout the city. The evacuation was announced only 36 hours later. The authorities assured that this was temporary, just for a few days. People packed their things, took documents, and sometimes simply left without closing the doors. In the apartments there were toys, dishes, books, photographs on the walls, everything that made up life. When the columns of buses left the city, no one thought that they were leaving forever. Today, Pripyat is a museum of time frozen at the moment of rupture. There are paper garlands hanging in kindergartens, and notebooks are open in classrooms, in which they did not have time to finish the last line. In the hospital, there are old gowns and instruments. In the stores, everything is frozen as it was. Cash registers, price tags, signs. In the apartments, books are open on random pages, and it seems that the owners are about to return. Even the clock in the city square still shows the very minute when life stopped. Over the decades, nature has regained what man once snatched from it. The asphalt cracked, trees grew through the concrete, roots destroyed stairs and walls. Moss grows on the roofs, moose and wolves walk the streets, birds nest in schools. Scientists call this nature's second wind. Here, the radioactive background remains high, but the flora and fauna have adapted, forming a special ecosystem. The paradox is that in a zone where life should have disappeared, it flourished. Biologists and ecologists come here to observe how evolution works in conditions where humans no longer exist. They record rare species of animals that have disappeared in many other places, and note the growth of populations of birds and large mammals. In the absence of people, nature has restored the balance that civilization had disrupted. And there is a strange justice in this. Where man was defeated, life won. But Pripyat remains not only a scientific site, she is an emotional wound frozen in concrete. Every street, every entrance bears the imprint of what happened and what will not happen again. The city is not destroyed, but it is dead without the people for whom it was built. It recalls the belief in absolute knowledge, the desire to control nature, and the price that had to be paid for this desire. From the heights of the roofs, where the wind sways the birch crowns, there is a view of the nuclear power plant, now covered with a sarcophagus, a symbol of the fact that a person can lock up his own mistake, but cannot erase its consequences. Here, time no longer moves forward. It doesn't go backwards. It just stands there, like radiation, invisible but noticeable. Pripyat is not just a reminder of the disaster. This is a symbol of the 20th century, a city that has become a monument to its era. It does not cause fear, but fills with silence in which the past can be heard. And maybe that's why people keep coming here, to see what eternity looks like when she was born overnight. If in Pripyat time froze at the moment of catastrophe, then in the mountains of California it fell asleep slowly, like a tired wanderer after a long journey. Among the desert slopes of the Sierra Nevada, at an altitude of more than 2,500 meters above sea level, lies the city of Bodhi, one of the rarest places on Earth where history is not told, but simply abandoned. Everything here is as it was on the day when the last person closed the door and left without looking back. Bodhi was born from dust and greed. In the mid-19th century, during the gold rush, placer gold was found in these mountains. The news spread quickly, and within a few months the lifeless valley turned into a seething hive. Hundreds of tents, dozens of mines, dust, noise, fights, songs, and excitement. The city grew out of chaos. By the end of the century, more than 10,000 people lived here. There were hotels, bars, a theater, a newspaper, schools, churches, a cemetery, and even a telegraph linking the city with the outside world. But life in Bodhi was not peaceful. It was called the City of Six Arrows because every night someone died. Prospectors mined gold, saloon owners profited, robbers and gamblers ruled the streets. The wind carried the smell of alcohol and gunpowder. The horses beat their hooves on the boards, and the torches illuminated faces that always showed fatigue. Everything in this city was short-lived, and perhaps that's why he never got old. When the deposits were depleted, Bodie began to fade away. People left. Houses became empty. Schools closed. Bell towers fell silent. By the beginning of the 20th century, only a few dozen residents remained here, and soon no one at all. But the city did not die. It was not destroyed by fires or washed away by time. It just stood there as if its inhabitants had only been gone for a day. There were still dishes on the tables, clothes in the closets, photographs on the walls. Even the books in the library were left open in the middle of the page. Over time, sand, cold, and sun dried out the wood, but did not erase traces of life. Now the air in Bodie is dense, dry, like the breath of centuries. Light streams in through the broken windows, illuminating the dust that hangs motionless, as if it refuses to fall. Each building is a vessel of time, where you can still smell oil, wood, metal. Archaeologists call this state canned silence. In the 20s of the 20th century, the state took Bodie into custody, declaring him arrested in a state of decline. This is a rare definition. The city is not restored, but it is not allowed to collapse. Every house, every street is preserved exactly as it was left. If the roof collapses, it is strengthened from the inside without changing the appearance. If a window is broken, it is covered with glass of exactly the same shade. Everything here must remain as is, not alive, not dead, but stopped. Tourists who come to Bodie walk along wooden boardwalks, hearing only the creak of their steps. The wind plays in the curtains, as if someone is breathing behind the wall. This sense of presence is so strong that even scientists who study the psychology of perception call Bodie a place of temporal echo. Everything here repeats the moment when man still believed that he could defeat nature and then gave up. Researchers find a special beauty in this city. In the absence of life, structure appears, order devoid of fuss. Dust falls on the furniture like a blanket, and rust turns the metal into a warm, almost living material. The sun rises and falls, but nothing changes. Every morning in Bodie feels like the first, and every morning feels like the last. The old mines going deep into the mountains are gradually collapsing, and in their darkness, there are still trolleys, pickaxes, and lanterns. The city, created for the sake of wealth, has now become wealth in itself, cultural, archaeological, human. Its preservation became its meaning. The bodysuit isn't just a reminder of the gold rush. This is a monument to the human desire for eternity, which always turns out to be temporary. Here, time has not defeated man and has not given way to him. It simply fell asleep, letting the dust tell stories instead of words. When in Bodie time fell asleep in the silence of wood and metal, in the depths of Australia it froze in dust that made it impossible to breathe. In the northwest of the continent, among the silent ranges of the Pilbara, lies Wittenoom, a city that no longer appears on maps. Its roads are filled in, its houses are demolished, and its name has even been removed from state registers. And yet it exists, as a shadow, as a reminder, as a trace of human breath that has become deadly. The history of Wittenoom began in the mid-20th century. After World War II, Australia needed new sources of industrial wealth, and beneath Mount Gummersley, geologists found deposits of blue asbestos, a mineral that could withstand heat and time. Asbestos became a symbol of progress. It was added to concrete, used in insulation, and installed in houses and factories. Hundreds of workers worked in the Wittenoom mines, and a village grew up near the mines. There were shops, a school, a hospital, and a cinema here. Life began to sound among the red hills, bright, difficult, but full of hope. The city flourished for almost 2 decades. Asbestos was mined, crushed, and transported. Dust fell on everything, on clothes, on hair, on children's toys. Nobody attached any importance to this. The whitish fog became part of everyday life. But in the 60s, alarming reports began to arrive. Workers were falling ill with strange lung diseases. Studies have shown that the smallest asbestos fibers, once entering the body, do not dissolve and are not excreted. They remain forever, turning your breath into poison. In the 70s, Witten began to close. First the mines, then schools, hospitals, houses. People left, but the dust remained. The wind blowing through the gorges lifted her from the ground, spreading invisible death for kilometers. The authorities declared the city a biohazard zone and made a decision. It needed to be erased. Since the end of the 20th century, Witten has officially ceased to exist. The electricity was cut off, roads were blocked, and houses were demolished so as not to leave any temptation to return. But a few people remained. They refused to leave, believing that fear was not a reason to lose their home. These last residents lived alone, surrounded by warning signs, listening to the poisonous dust rustling across the roofs at night. The government tried for a long time to resettle them, but they did not give in, and only at the beginning of the 21st century the last house in Vietnam was completely empty. Now this place is called the Forbidden Valley. From the air, Vietnam looks like a fragment of a dream, the remains of streets, rusty car frames, traces of foundations. At the entrance to the valley there is a sign, "Entry prohibited, life-threatening." But even decades later, researchers are recording high levels of asbestos dust in the air. Scientists come here in protective suits to study how nature gradually heals the wounds inflicted by humans. The most amazing thing is that the city does not look dead. There is no feeling of devastation, only stillness. Red earth, blue-gray stones, sunlight piercing the void. Everything seems too clean, as if Australia itself decided to erase not only the city, but also the traces of error. There are no sounds here, not even birds fly. Only the wind whispers, rolling grains of sand, and this sound is similar to the breathing of those who once worked in the mines. Archaeologists and environmentalists call Witten a symbol of human fragility. It did not die from the war, did not disappear underwater, was not destroyed by time. It was the breath itself that destroyed it, the invisible, silent threat born of progress. And now, when even the map no longer remembers his name, Vietnam has become a reminder that oblivion can sometimes be an act of mercy. As the sun sets behind the Pilbara Mountains, the sky turns a deep purple. For a moment, the shadows of the rocks fall on the ground exactly where the houses once stood, and it seems as if the city is breathing again. But with the first gust of wind, dust rises into the air, and the past disappears again. On the coast of southwestern Turkey, nestled among olive groves and limestone hills, lies a city that seems to have remained in the shadow of its own reflection. Its white walls shine in the sun, its streets still retain the smell of sea and grass. But outside the windows, there is emptiness. Kayakoi, an ancient settlement near Fethiye, has stood silent for almost 100 years. Time did not die here, but simply stopped moving, like an hourglass turned upside down and forgotten on a shelf. The history of this city dates back to Byzantine times, when a Greek settlement called Levisi grew up on the slopes of Mount Antigora. For centuries, artisans, sailors, and traders lived here, creating a special, unlike anything else atmosphere. Cramped stone houses, churches with mosaics, streets descending to the valley. All this existed in harmony with nature and time until history intervened at the beginning of the 20th century. After the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the Greek-Turkish conflict broke out in the lands of Asia Minor. In 1923, according to the Treaty of Lausanne, a forced resettlement of peoples took place. Greek Christians from Turkey were sent to Greece, and Muslims from Greece to Turkey. This decision changed the fate of thousands of villages, and Kayakoi became one of them. Its inhabitants, descendants of generations who had lived here for centuries, were forced to leave their homes. They took with them icons, a few things, and keys to doors that were never opened again. When they left, the city remained. Nobody repopulated it. Muslim settlers preferred more fertile valleys, and Kayakoi, located on the mountainside, was abandoned. The wind passing between the houses became the only inhabitant. The churches collapsed, the roofs sank, but the walls stood. Today in Kayakoi there are more than 500 houses standing in perfect order, as if people had simply disappeared, leaving everything in place. Even the stairs leading to nowhere have preserved the polished stone from human footsteps. Archaeologists call Kayakoi one of the best preserved examples of Anatolian architecture. Each house is built from local limestone, oriented towards the sun to keep it cool in summer and light in winter. Inside some buildings, remains of frescoes, traces of furniture, and fireplaces with ashes are still visible. When you walk inside, the air smells of salt and thyme. It seems that voices are about to be heard outside the door, but it's only the wind blowing along the stairs. In the 50s of the last century, the authorities tried to populate the city again, but the attempt failed. Locals believed that Kayaki was cursed, that it held within itself the melancholy of those who were forced to leave. Now it has become an open-air museum. Tourists climb to the top of the hill to see the gray stones sparkle in the sun. But most don't stay long. There is something about this place that makes you silent. Even the birds sing more quietly. Scientists who study cultural memory call Kayakoi an architectural echo. It is neither destroyed nor alive, it simply exists. There is no time in it in the usual sense. Day and night are the same here, only the light changes as it glides across the stone. At sunset, the houses are painted pink, and it seems as if the walls are breathing, absorbing the last rays of the sun. Kayakoi stands as a symbol of peace, which was erased not by nature or war, but by a decision written on paper. And yet, despite human oblivion, the city remained beautiful. It became a monument to lost harmony, not destroyed but simply abandoned. Under the merciless sun of the Atacama Desert, where not a blade of grass or a flower grows, where the air is drier than ash and the sky seems closer than the earth, lies a ghost town that was once the heart of life of an entire continent. His name is Humberstone. Today, this place looks like the scenery of a dream, but just 100 years ago it was bustling with industry that fed South America, connecting it with Europe and Asia. There was no gold or silver here, but there was something that was considered more precious: saltpeter, the white gold of the desert. In the mid-19th century, when the chemical industry did not yet know synthetic fertilizers, Chile became the world's source of nitrogen. Sodium nitrate was extracted from the desert, which was sent on ships around the world, for gunpowder, for fertilizers, for factories. And where previously there was only dead land, cities arose. Humberstone, founded in 1892, became the largest of these. Its buildings were built right on the sand: schools, hospitals, a theater, a church, residential areas for workers. In the desert, tin roofs sparkled, children began to laugh, and factory chimneys began to smoke. Life here was subject to the sun and the sound of iron. The workers left for their shifts before dawn and returned when the heat subsided. People from all over South America flocked to the city: Chileans, Bolivians, Peruvians, British. The desert seemed to become a field of human will. Every day, trains with barrels of saltpeter passed along the narrow-gauge railway. Their carriages rang in the dry air, and the sand burned under the wheels. But Humberstone was not only a symbol of labor, but also of suffering. The conditions were difficult. The temperature rose to 50 degrees, dust corroded the lungs, water was delivered from afar. People lived in barracks, and only the managers had brick houses. The workers went on strike, starved, and then went back to the mines. There was no choice. And yet the city lived. There were performances in the theater, songs were sung in the school, and celebrations were held in the main square. Human perseverance did the impossible. It revived the desert. Everything changed in the mid-20th century when chemists learned to produce nitrogen artificially. Synthetic saltpeter destroyed the market, and the desert took its toll again. Factories stopped, trains stopped running, workers left. Within a few years, Humberstone was empty. The wind filled the streets, the doors closed, the wells dried up. The sun that had once illuminated the work now illuminated only the ruins. Today, Humberstone is an open-air museum. Its streets seem to be carved out of metal and sand. The school still stands, and there are traces of chalk on the blackboard. In the theater, there were chairs covered in dust, and in the bar, there were bottles frozen on the shelves. Everything seems to be waiting for the viewer who was 100 years late for the performance. Even the inscriptions on the walls have not been erased. The paint has not peeled off, because there is almost no moisture here, and the air is still like glass. Scientists call this phenomenon the natural mummification of architecture. There is no rain in Atacama, and therefore the city does not collapse. The metal only darkens over time, but does not rust. When you enter one of the houses, you feel a strange calm. There is no horror or desolation here, only the smooth breathing of the earth. The wind whispers through the cracks in the windows, and the sound is like the sigh of an old mechanism that still remembers how to work. Humberstone is included in the UNESCO World Heritage List. It is protected but not restored, so that it remains as it is. The desert carefully holds him in her arms, like a mother who has finally returned her child. In the evenings, the sun turns iron into copper, and the city shines as if alive. It seems that if you blink, somewhere in the distance the hammer will ring again, the factory will hum, the locomotive whistle will sing. But then darkness falls softly, and the city falls asleep again. Its streets are filled not with darkness, but with peace. This is the peace of work, the peace of memory, the peace of time, which knows that it has already done everything it could. On the map of northern Alaska, between the cold mountains and the black waters of Cook Strait, there is a point where there is nothing, no light, no movement, no sound. The village of Port Locke once stood here. Today, all that remains of it are stone foundations, rotting piles of the old pier, and the remains of rusty tanks. But the air around still retains tension, as if the place itself remembers how one day a man tried to tame it and disappeared. Port Locke's history began in the early 20th century. American entrepreneurs opened a fish processing plant in these places. A village grew up around it, wooden houses, a school, a church, shops, a pier. People came to work as families, despite difficult conditions. Cold winds, frequent rains, endless winters. Everything in Port Locke depended on the sea. When the catch was good, the village lived noisily and cheerfully. When the fish left, life froze, but did not stop, until time ends here. In the 40s of the last century, strange things began to happen. First, hunters began to disappear from the forest. Then they found the first bodies, mutilated, scattered across the ravines. People talked about bears, but the tracks didn't match. Then, 2 fishermen disappeared. Their boat washed ashore without signs of a struggle. Several families began to leave. The rest held out, until one day the whole village was empty. It happened suddenly. No one knows the exact date. There are no records, no official report. Port Locke just fell silent one day. Later, explorers came to these regions. They found traces of life, as if people had left for a minute. Dishes on the tables, nets on the pier, unmade beds. In the letters and memoirs of those who survived, there are words of fear that cannot be explained. They said that at night strange footsteps were heard from the forest, as if someone huge was walking between the trees. They talked about shadows moving without light, but the reality was much more prosaic. Harsh climate, disease, hunger, psychological pressure. All this could destroy the community faster than any mysticism. Today, archaeologists view Port Lock as an example of the collapse of an isolated settlement. The economy depended on one industry, supplies from the mainland were often delayed, and there was almost no medical care. When difficulties coincided with a series of deaths, the village could not stand it. People left their homes in a hurry, taking only what they needed. The last light lit in Port Lock went out sometime in the mid-50s. Now, above the place, there are only spruce trees, bent by the wind, and low clouds. In the evenings, when the fog descends from the mountains, the old buildings become almost invisible. Only the outlines of the roofs can be discerned in the milky haze. Researchers who work here in the summer say that the silence of Port Lock is special, not natural, but human. It is dense, as if the space does not want voices to sound here again. Nature is slowly reclaiming what belongs to it. Moss covers the boards, birds build nests in window openings, and the river erodes the banks. Sometimes historians come to the site to take soil samples, measure radiation levels, and study traces of economic activity. They record the growth of new plants and believe that in a few decades, Port Lock will disappear completely, absorbed by the tundra. And yet the memory of him remained, not in notes, but in sensations. Here man first realized how easily nature could erase his presence. No destruction, no disasters, just oblivion. After Port Lock disappeared, leaving behind only an alarming emptiness and traces of human breath, the gaze of time seemed to turn to the east, to where the ocean hides other cities beneath it. In the waters off the coast of Japan stands an island that has not gone into darkness, but has become a monolith of memory. Its walls still stand, as if they themselves are trying to hold on to an era that has gone underwater. This is Hashima, a tiny piece of land surrounded by the sea, where concrete has become the flesh of the past. Hashima Island is located near Nagasaki, just 20 kilometers from the coast, but it seems as if it is separated from the world not by distance, but by time. Today it looks like a gray ship frozen in the sea, but back in the 19th century life was in full swing here. It all started when Japanese engineers discovered deposits of coal under the seabed, the fuel that became the heart of the Industrial Revolution. The Mitsubishi Company bought the island and built mines that go hundreds of meters under the ocean. Thus began a new chapter of Japanese history, where for the first time man dared to carve a city right into the body of the sea. Life on the island developed rapidly. At the beginning of the 20th century, Hashima became a miniature metropolis. Concrete houses, schools, shops, churches, and hospitals grew on several hectares of land. There were no trees, no soil, no gardens, only stone, steel, and iron. But people lived, got married, raised children, and worked 12-hour shifts underground. In the morning, miners descended into hot tunnels where the temperature rose above 40 degrees and the air was saturated with coal dust. In the evening, they returned to cramped apartments, where each wall divided the space between dozens of families. Despite the harsh conditions, Hashima lived like an organism. There was laughter in the school, clothes were drying on the roofs, and small shops were selling rice and vegetables delivered by sea. Celebrations were taking place in the square, and new Japanese films were shown in the tiny cinema. People learned not to notice the noise of the sea, which surrounded them on all sides. It became part of everyday life, like breathing. But the island also had a shadow side. During World War II, the labor of prisoners and prisoners of war from Korea and China was used here. They worked underground in unbearable conditions, and many never returned. This page of history was hushed up for a long time, but the memory of it still remained in the walls, in the mines, in the silence that sounds louder than any evidence. By the mid-20th century, coal began to give way to oil. The island, once prosperous, began to lose its meaning. The mines closed one after another, and soon Hashima was empty. In 1974, Mitsubishi announced a complete cessation of production and evacuated all residents. Over the course of a few weeks, the ships carried out 5,000 people. They left, leaving everything: furniture, toys, photographs, dishes. Even the radios remained on. Since then, the island has stood as if carved out of another world. The wind whistles through broken windows. Sea salt eats away at the concrete, but the buildings still stand. Hashima's concrete turned out to be stronger than time. Here, everything froze as it was on the last day of the city's life. In classrooms, you can still see traces of chalk on the boards. In apartments, there are dishes on the shelves. And on the stairs, there are rusty bicycles, long since fused with dust. Scholars call Hashima the archaeology of modernity. Unlike ancient ruins, it does not disappear into the sand, but stands in the same form in which it was left. This is a museum of human everyday life, not restored or protected from time, but simply left in his hands. The sun rises above the gray walls and goes beyond the horizon without making the slightest change. Everything here exists in balance, neither life, nor death, nor movement. Hashima is included in the UNESCO World Heritage List, but can only be reached along a narrow route open to rare excursions. Tourists walk through collapsed galleries, where the silence is thicker than the air. She doesn't oppress, but rather holds. Every step sounds like an echo of the last century. Even the sea around seems calmer, as if it doesn't want to disturb the concrete peace. This island is a symbol of how man once decided to subjugate nature and build a future in a place where it is impossible to live. But when the need disappeared, the future froze along with him. Hashima was a reminder of the fragility of civilization, of how easily progress turns into memory. Here, everything human has disappeared, but order, silence, and gray stone remain, in which the breath of time seems to have frozen. Hashima does not need protection. It is protected by the sea itself, cold, impassive, eternal. It polishes the concrete and returns the island to its original essence, to be part of the elements, not of man. After Hashima, where the concrete merged with the sea, time seemed to turn to the cold, to where memory does not burn, but freezes. Among the snowy valleys of the Spitzbergen archipelago, beyond the Arctic Circle, lies a place where the past has not been destroyed, but has been preserved, like a fly in amber. Here the wind sweeps away traces, but does not touch the essence. This is Pyramid, the northernmost city built by the Soviet Union, and one of those places where history never dies because the cold prevents it from decaying. The pyramid arose in the 30s of the 20th century, when Soviet geologists discovered coal on Spitzbergen. On these harsh islands, mining seemed impossible. Permafrost, 9 months of darkness, temperatures dropping to 40 degrees below zero. But this is precisely what became the challenge. The Soviet government decided to build here not just a mine, but a model city, a symbol of human perseverance and ideological superiority. City of the future on the edge of the world. Construction took decades. At the end of the 40s, the first houses appeared, then a school, a club, a greenhouse, a gym, and a library. Everything was built in strict order, with straight streets and architecture reminiscent of the best examples of the Stalinist empire style. In the central square, there was a monument to Lenin, the northernmost monument on the planet. His face still looks towards the mountain that gave the city its name. Behind it is the Palace of Culture, with stained glass windows, residential areas, a kindergarten, a greenhouse where tomatoes, cucumbers, and flowers were grown under lamps. Life in the pyramid went smoothly. The best specialists, engineers, miners, and their families were sent here. They were paid well, supplies went uninterrupted, fresh food, books, even musical instruments were delivered from the mainland. The mines were working. In the evening, people went to the cinema. Children sledded between houses. In winter, the aurora hung over the city. In summer, the sun did not set beyond the horizon. Everything here existed as if in a closed model, Ideally planned, self-sufficient, frozen in its own rhythm. But behind the facade of idealism, fatigue was always hidden. The isolation was oppressive, the polar night was maddening, and work in the mines was deadly. The ground under the pyramid was unforgiving of mistakes. One wrong move, and an avalanche of coal could engulf an entire brigade. People died, but their names were not written in the newspapers. The city was supposed to remain a showcase. In the 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, funding stopped. In 1998, the last batch of coal was raised to the surface. People loaded their suitcases onto ships and left, leaving everything behind. A piano in the club, books on the shelves, paintings on the walls, skates in the wardrobes. Even bottles of milk were left in the refrigerators. No one destroyed or plundered. The cold made this place inviolable. Now the pyramid stands like an illusion city. The wind whistles between the panel houses, the flags fade, but do not fall. There is snow on the stairs that does not melt. Everything seems alive, as if people are just sleeping. When you enter the house, you hear your own breathing, and it seems that someone is listening back. In the greenhouse, there are still pots with dried soil, and in the club hall, there are posters that have turned yellow with age. Even the scoreboard on the sports ground still shows zeros, as if the game has not yet started. Scientists call the pyramid a museum of frozen socialism. Nothing changes here because the climate does not allow it. The permafrost even retains the smell. The air smells of coal and iron, as in those days when life was in full swing underground. For historians, this city has become a living archive of the 20th century, where everything is preserved in its original form. Costumes, tools, documents, newspaper scraps. Every little thing here speaks louder than any words. When the sun rises over the fjord in summer, the light reflects off the windows of the houses, and the city seems alive. But as soon as you take a step, the silence becomes absolute. Only the wind passes through the streets, as if reading an invisible book. The pyramid no longer belongs to man. It belongs to time, which does not move here but stands still like ice. Perhaps no place on earth shows so clearly that memory does not always die. Sometimes it just waits. After the polar silence of the pyramid, where the cold protects memory, the world seems to open another page, where time is hidden not in ice, but in metal. On the shores of Lake Constance, among soft slopes and clear skies, stands a gigantic structure similar to a cathedral, but dedicated not to faith, but to invention. This is the Zeppelin hangar, a vault of steel and light under which humanity first tried to tame the sky. Friedrichshafen, at the beginning of the 20th century, was a city of dreaming engineers. Here, an idea was born that changed the idea of air as emptiness. Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, a man of military bearing and almost religious tenacity, believed that it was possible to build a controllable airship capable of crossing the oceans. This required a place where you could assemble not just a car, but a whole world of metal and hydrogen. So a hangar grew up on the shore of the lake, a structure that Europe had not yet known. Its length exceeded 200 meters, its height was equal to a 9-story building, and the gate was so huge that when it opened, it created its own wind. Under its arches, riveting hammers rattled day and night. Thousands of parts were connected into perfect arcs. Each truss became part of the skeleton of a flying giant. Legends were born here: Zeppelin LZ, Count Zeppelin, Hindenburg. These names sounded like titles of an era that believed that technology could conquer distance. The first flights attracted crowds of spectators. The airships rose slowly, majestically, as if not machines but living beings. They crossed the Alps, seas, even the Atlantic, turning the journey into a celestial ritual. In the 30s, the hangar in Friedrichshafen became a symbol of progress. Its metal dome reflected sunrises and shone in the spotlights at night. Inside, under the arches, there was a smell of oil and hot aluminum. Each new airship seemed to be a step towards a future where the sky would become as dear as the earth. But in this desire, there was already a shadow hiding. When the Hindenburg caught fire in Lakehurst, America, in May 1937, everything changed. The world, watching the flames on the Chronicle screens, lost faith in the air giants. After the disaster, the hangars were empty. Some of them were turned into warehouses, others into military workshops. During the Second World War, they became targets for bombers, but miraculously, the main one, the one standing on the shore of Lake Constance, survived. Its metal trusses have survived shelling, icing, reconstruction, and oblivion. Only decades later, when the airships had become a memory, did people return to the hangar, not engineers, but custodians. Today, it is one of the most impressive buildings in Germany. Inside, there is a museum where you can see restored engines, maps of the first routes, photographs of airships hovering over cities that look like miniature models. In the huge hall, there is an exact copy of the gondola in which passengers traveled. Wooden chairs, brass instruments, windows offering views of the clouds. The air here still smells of time, a mixture of dust, oil, and subtle ozone, like a memory of past flights. Architects and historians call the Zeppelin hangar a cathedral of technology. Its design is amazing. Not a single weld, only thousands of riveted joints calculated by hand. The metal in it does not age, does not crack, and does not lose elasticity. There is something symbolic in this. Iron turned out to be more durable than human ideals. It has survived wars, political systems, the very belief in technology as a path to salvation. Standing under the dome, it is difficult to separate the present from the past. Rays of light penetrating through the windows fall on the rivets, on the rounded trusses, and it seems that everything around is breathing, not with air, but with memory. In this silence, you can hear the hum of old engines, the echoes of the engineer's steps, the creaking of the wheels from which the flight began. Here, time did not disappear, but only slowed down so that the metal could hold it. The Zeppelin hangar is not just a monument to engineering. This is the place where a person left a trace of his desire to rise higher than allowed. Its arches remind you that the dream of heaven can burn, but does not die. The metal is cold, but the warmth of human audacity still sounds in it. And as long as there is at least one person under this dome, looking up, the world will not be able to completely forget how people once tried to build eternity from steel and wind. After the cold hangars of Germany, where metal retains the breath of the past, the step of time seems to move towards the sun, to where the sea still smells, but life is long gone. On the southeastern coast of Cyprus, among golden beaches and burnt palm trees, stands a city that is frozen forever in the mid-20th century. Varosha is a place where summer lasts forever, but not a single person can feel it. Varosha was the heart of Cypriot tourism. In the 60s, it became a symbol of the new Mediterranean, modern, rich, noisy. Hotels, restaurants, marinas were built here. Hollywood stars, European nobility, photographers, and journalists came here. Snow-white facades, palm trees along the embankment, shop windows with French fashion, the smell of coffee and sun. The city lived in the rhythm of endless vacations. It was a golden age for Cyprus, when it seemed that history could no longer intervene. But in 1974, everything ended. After the military coup, Turkish troops landed on the island, and within a few days, Varosha found itself in a war zone. People left in a hurry, leaving suitcases, documents, dishes, photographs. Nobody believed that he was leaving forever. The city was deserted, and soon fences appeared around it and barbed wire along the beaches. Since then, Varosha has been closed. For more than half a century, its streets belong only to the wind, sand, and sun. When the war ended, the border divided the island, and Varosha remained in the zone controlled by Turkish troops. The authorities declared the territory a military facility, prohibiting even civilians from entering. Since then, the city has lived in its own time. The facades of the buildings are fading, but still standing. The windows are broken but not destroyed. Inside stores, there are still mannequins dressed in clothes from the 70s, and in garages there are cars with license plates from that era. The sand is slowly consuming the streets, trees are growing through the walls, but the structure of the city remains. Researchers call Varosha a museum of slow decay. Here time does not move linearly, but seems to spin in one place. Everything in this space reminds of life, but nothing lives. Even the sea washing the shore seems motionless. When you look at the city from the outside, it's hard to believe that behind every window there was once a light on, and thousands of people walked along these streets. Journalists who managed to get to Varosha under the escort of the military describe a strange feeling, as if the city was waiting for the return of its owners. There are sheets on hotel beds, equipment in restaurants, and dusty microphones on stages. Everything seems ready for the beginning of a day that will never come. Birds fly into empty apartments, cats walk on the roofs, but man has disappeared, leaving behind a perfect order of oblivion. For Cyprus, Varosha became a symbol of the lost paradise. Politicians are arguing about its future. Some talk about returning it, others about preserving it as a historical monument. But perhaps silence is her only chance to remain real. Restore these streets, reopen the hotels, and the very magic of the place will disappear, where the past is not only preserved, but frozen, like a frame from an old film. Today, there is still the same azure horizon over Varosha. The sun illuminates the faded facades, the sea glitters in the broken windows, and the wind plays with the curtains in the rooms where no one lives anymore. This city seems to breathe on its own, not with people, not with time, but with memories. Scientists involved in the study of urban memory call Varosha a time trap. There is no destruction here, only stillness. It does not fade, does not grow. It simply exists between then and now. This strange balance is where her attractiveness lies. Varosha is not destroyed, because destruction is also movement. It remained untouched, like a trace of human confidence that summer could last forever. After the sunny silence of Varosha, where the past has dissolved in the glare of the sea, time seems to take us to another element, to where, under a layer of concrete and neon, the memory of the civilization that preceded our world is hidden. Among the shining streets and high-speed trains in the city of Sakai, not far from Osaka Bay, there is a silence that is more than 1,500 years old. Here, beneath residential areas and roads, sleep the burial mounds of the emperors and nobles of the ancient Kofun era, mountains of stone built to survive centuries. And they really survived. Time passed, but the hills remained, hidden under the asphalt, like a memory that does not want to be disturbed. Sakai City today is the pulse of the metropolis, surrounded by bridges and highways. But as soon as you go up to the observation deck, your gaze reveals a strange pattern. Among the straight lines of the blocks, you can see huge green ovals, like islands in a sea of urbanization. These are mounds, or kofuns, burial complexes created between the 3rd and 6th centuries A.D., when Japan did not yet know writing, but already knew power. The most famous of them is the mausoleum of Emperor Nintoku, a gigantic structure almost half a kilometer long. Its shape resembles a keyhole, a rounded top connected to a straight protrusion, an ancient symbol of the connection of heaven and earth. Archaeologists say that the construction of such a mound required the efforts of tens of thousands of people. The earth was carried in baskets, layer by layer, creating terraces on which stone sculptures, bronze mirrors, and clay Haniwa figurines were installed. These figures are guards, guardians of the border between the living and the dead. They stood along ditches lined with river stones, watching over the peace of their rulers. When the empires disappeared, the mounds remained, silent, covered with grass, becoming part of the landscape. But time has not been kind to space. With the development of cities, ancient mounds were surrounded by roads, houses, and factories. Some were raised, others were built up. However, the largest ones, including the Nintoku tomb, survived, and now they exist in the city center, like the green hearts of the metropolis. From the height of a drone, their outlines are clearly visible, but on the ground, they are just hills with parks and ponds where pine trees grow and sakura blooms. People walk here, not always realizing that they are walking on the edge of an ancient world. Sakai kept his secrets silently for a long time. It was only in the 20th century that Japanese archaeologists began systematic research. They discovered complex underground chambers lined with granite, tombs containing the remains of lacquered sarcophagi, and bronze swords with intricate patterns. Radiocarbon dating has shown that many of these structures are older than Roman aqueducts. However, access to the interior of most mounds is closed, out of respect for the peace of the ancestors and fears of disturbing the fragile balance. In 2019, the group of kofuns in Sakai was listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is a recognition not only of historical value, but also of a unique contrast. The ancient and the modern coexist here literally on the same level. The metro runs under the hills. Shopping centers stand at their feet, and office windows reflect their silhouettes in the evening light. This strange juxtaposition reveals the essence of the Japanese attitude to time, not to destroy, but to incorporate the past into the present. Scientists call Sakai the city under layers. Here, every meter of land contains traces of past eras. Shards of vessels are found under roads, remains of clay walls are found under houses, and ditches that were once filled with water are found under parks. Archaeology in this place resembles not an excavation, but a conversation. Each new layer answers questions, but also asks new ones. And yet the main thing that is felt here is the breath of time, which does not die. When you stand on top of the mound, you can see modern neighborhoods, roads, and power lines all around. Everything moves, glows, hums, but underfoot lies peace that is 1,500 years old. There are only a few meters of land between these two worlds, but they separate entire eras. Sakai is a reminder that even in the most modern cities, under a layer of concrete and glass, antiquity lives. It does not contradict progress. It makes it possible, because only those who remember the past are able to build the future. Here, among the lights of the metropolis, time has not stopped, but has become multi-layered. It flows up and down, connecting the worlds, like a river in which the sky and depth are reflected. While in Japan, antiquity is hidden under the layers of the city, in the heart of South America, it lies open, under a sky that knows no rain. On the Altiplano Plateau, among the rare air and cold where the mountains touch the clouds, lies the Puma Punku complex, a place whose name in the Aymara language means Gate of the Puma. Here, among stones weighing tens of tons, time stopped not because of oblivion, but because it itself became part of the stone. Puma Punku is part of the great center of Tiwanaku, an ancient civilization that arose long before the Incas, around the first millennium A.D. When the Spanish conquistadors first came here, they saw not just ruins, but stone fragments of the world, as if carved from a drawing that did not belong to man. Blocks of red sandstone and gray andesite lie here, as if they were once dropped from a height. Some reach a weight of 130 tons. But the mystery is not in the size, but in the shape. Perfectly straight edges, smooth corners, grooves, and holes made with such precision that even a knife blade cannot pass between them. Archaeologists claim that these stones were part of a temple complex, where rituals related to the sun, water, and earth took place. Puma Punku and neighboring Tiwanaku were not just settlements, but a spiritual center where engineering and faith converged. Scientists find traces of hydraulic systems, channels through which water flowed, creating mirror images of temples and heavens. Hidden under a layer of sand are the remains of a foundation made of blocks, connected without lime, but so tightly that they can withstand earthquakes for thousands of years. Debate continues about how these stones were processed. Archaeologists have not found tools capable of cutting diorite with such precision. It is only known that the builders used copper and stone tools. Some researchers believe the secret lies not in the tools, but in the processing technology. Perhaps a combination of heat, vibration, and water. But this remains a hypothesis. The most surprising thing is that even with modern equipment, repeating such connections without gaps is an almost impossible task. From above, Pumapunku seems like a disorderly pile of stones, but as soon as you get closer, order emerges from the chaos. Every detail is calibrated, like a fragment of a huge mechanism. Some blocks are shaped like an H and fit perfectly together when placed together. Scientists believe that walls and platforms were assembled from them, connected into a single system. It may have been a temple of the stars or a sanctuary oriented towards the sunrise on the winter solstice. In the surrounding area, traces of cult statues and fragments of ceramics with images of the gods of Tiwanaku are found, Viracocha, the creator of the world, and Pachacamac, the lord of the earth. It is believed that this is where Andean cosmology originated, where man is not separated from stone, water, and wind. And perhaps that is why Pumapunku is perceived not as a ruin, but as a living space in which the breath of antiquity continues. Over the years, the site has become the subject of scientific research, but even today, access to some parts of it is limited. Not because of the danger, but because of the fragility. A stone that is thousands of years old does not like to be touched. It is destroyed by humidity, by footsteps, and by spotlights. Scientists create three-dimensional models to preserve every crack, every line. Pumapunku is gradually transferred to the digital space, but its real essence remains only here. At an altitude of almost 4,000 meters, where the air rings with cold and the sun cuts the shadows like a knife. When you stand among these monoliths, it seems that the earth is breathing. The wind passes through holes in the stones, producing sounds similar to low singing. And in this singing, one can hear something human, the memory of those who once built not for themselves, but for eternity. Pumapunku is not a mystery in the usual sense. This is proof that man is capable of creating outside of time. Here the stone ceases to be a material. It becomes a language. And maybe someday we will learn to understand it again. After the stone terraces of Pumapunku, where eternity takes shape, time seems to return to the sea, where history is not hidden or destroyed, but simply stands as a witness. On the shores of the Adriatic Sea, among mountains and water, rises a city whose walls have survived everything: empires, wars, earthquakes. Dubrovnik is a place where time has not stopped, but has become cautious. Every stone here keeps traces of centuries, and every sound of footsteps along its streets echoes thousands of years. The history of Dubrovnik began in the 7th century, when fugitives from the destroyed Roman city of Epidaurus found refuge on a small island off the coast of Dalmatia. They built a fortress here, which eventually turned into a city. Medieval Dubrovnik, then known as Ragusa, became a trading hub between east and west. His fleet plied the Mediterranean Sea, and his streets heard the speech of merchants from all over the world. The city flourished thanks to diplomacy, knowledge of the seas, and wise rule. The main feature of Dubrovnik has always been independence. Even when empires collapsed around him, he knew how to maintain balance, making alliances with those who were stronger, but never giving himself completely. Its symbol was libertas, freedom. This word is still engraved on the stone tower overlooking the old city. The walls of Dubrovnik are not just architecture, but a chronicle. Their length exceeds 2 kilometers, and their thickness reaches 6 meters. They are built of limestone, which has darkened over time but has not weakened. Armies have come beyond these walls more than once. In the 14th century, the Venetians later, the Ottomans in the 20th century, artillery, But the city always rose. After each blow, he restored himself, stone by stone, street by street. An earthquake in the 17th century destroyed almost the entire city, but the inhabitants did not leave it. They collected stones, cleared away the rubble, and rebuilt houses, temples, and palaces. Even the architecture of the new Dubrovnik retained the same lines: narrow streets, arched windows, light stone reflecting the sun. This city was not built from scratch. It was brought back to life, like breathing is brought back. Every morning the sun rises over the fortress towers, painting them copper. The light glides across the smooth slabs of the streets, where merchants, sailors, monks, and warriors have walked for centuries. There is not a single detail here that is accidental. Even gutters designed in the Middle Ages still work to drain rain from roofs. Under the stones there are ancient cisterns collecting water, a system created long before the advent of modern engineering solutions. In the Old Town Museum, you can see books of trade records that have been kept without interruption since the 15th century. These books are like the pulse of time. Each page records the movement of ships, the sale of salt, wine, and silk. Dubrovnik was and remains a place where history is not kept in museums. It goes through the streets along with the people. During the last war of the 20th century, the city again came under fire. Hundreds of shells hit the walls, fires destroyed the roofs, but even then the inhabitants did not leave it. When the fighting ended, the most careful reconstruction in European history began. The stones were sorted by color and age to return them to their place. Each section of the wall was checked by craftsmen, many of whom were descendants of those who rebuilt the city after the earthquake 400 years ago. Today, Dubrovnik is not just a resort. He lives like ancient cities live, slowly, with dignity. Its streets are filled with music and voices, but behind all this noise you still feel a deep silence, the one that is born when a place becomes older than its inhabitants. There is no need to look for a museum here. The whole city is a museum, only a living one. Scientists call Dubrovnik an archaeology of survival. It did not remain in the past and did not become a ruin. It managed to unite centuries, preserving itself. Every tower, every door, every tile in the square are parts of one body in which time still flows. You can't stop it, but you can slow it down. You can learn to listen to how it sounds in stone. When evening falls on the Adriatic, the walls are painted orange, and it seems as if the city is young again. Waves beat against the foot of the fortress, seagulls circle above the towers, and in this rhythm one feels something unchangeable. In Dubrovnik, time does not pass. It simply breathes, slowly, calmly, like the sea. After the mighty walls of Dubrovnik, where stone speaks the language of centuries, history moves to the soft hills of southern Italy, where houses look like shells growing out of the earth. Alberobello is a village where architecture has become a form of memory. Here time did not stop forcibly, as after wars or disasters, it simply slowed down, turning into white limestone and round roofs, built without a single piece of cement. This place seems to be cut out of a dream, but it is absolutely real. Alberobello is located in the Apulia region, between valleys of vineyards and olive groves. Its appearance is unique. Hundreds of small houses with conical roofs, called trulli, form a bizarre labyrinth of narrow streets. Each trullo is built from local limestone, laid by hand without mortar, only with precise calculation of weight and shape. The domes are topped with stone spears, and ancient symbols are often visible on the walls. The sun, crosses, signs that came from pre-Christian times. The history of this unusual settlement dates back to the 17th century, when the region belonged to the Count of Aquaviva. To avoid taxes that were levied on each capital building, peasants began to build houses without cement, so that if necessary they could be quickly dismantled and put back together. This is how an entire architectural culture arose, the trulli, a symbol of the bypassing wisdom and resilience of ordinary people. Over time, this form of construction acquired aesthetic significance. Homes became not only shelter, but also an expression of harmony with nature. The stones from which the walls were made were quarried nearby. The earth itself provided the material. Thanks to the thick walls and dome shape, the inside always remains cool in summer and warm in winter. Even without modern technology, residents were able to create an ideal microclimate based on observations and intuition. Archaeologists and architects call Alberobello a living monument to instinctive construction. Not a single house here was built according to drawings. Everything was designed by eye, generation after generation passing on the skill of installation. The oldest craftsmen, known in the village as maschiari, still teach the young ones, explaining how to lay the top stone, the pinnacle, a symbol of the completed house. Each master has his own style, and therefore no two truly are alike even if they stand side by side. When you look at Alberobello from above, it resembles a swarm of white shells scattered across the green hills. During the day, the sun makes the walls dazzlingly bright. At night, the moon paints the stone silver. There is no pretentiousness or pomp here, but there is something that modern cities lack, a sense of peace. In these houses, time seems to freeze, but not with dead cold, but with soft silence. While walking through the streets of Alberobello, you will notice that the houses are very close to each other, forming a single fabric. This is not an accident. In the old days, the walls of neighbors literally supported each other, preventing the building from collapsing during earthquakes. Even this is the philosophy of mutual dependence by which the villagers lived. No one existed separately. A house was part of another house, and a person was part of a community. Today, Alberobello is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but life here has not become a museum. People still live in Trulli, cook on stone slabs, and dry clothes in narrow streets, just like 300 years ago. Tourists come to see the village from a fairy tale, but for locals it is just a home, familiar and eternal. Local residents say that Trulli have special acoustics. Any word spoken inside seems to be repeated in a whisper. This whisper is not an echo, but, as the old people say, the breath of stone. Perhaps this is the magic of Alberobello. The houses here are not silent. They breathe along with the people. When the sun sets behind the hills, the light goes out in the small windows, and it seems that the village falls asleep, like a living creature. The wind passes between the roofs, sways the flags on the spears, and everything around is plunged into that very silence in which time no longer counts the days. Alberobello is not just an ancient settlement. This is a reminder that sustainability and beauty come from simplicity, that a home can be part of the landscape and a person can be an extension of the earth. There is nothing accidental here, because everything was created by hands that knew moderation and peace. And maybe that's why time decided to stay here, not as memory, but as life. When on the other side of the world antiquity rests in stone and dust, in Mongolia it lives in motion. In the wind that carries across the steppe the smell of herbs, the rustle of rivers, and the voices of bygone empires. Here in the Orkan Valley, time did not freeze, but stretched out, dissolving between the hills and the sky. Thousands of years of history lie not in the ground, but on its surface, in mounds, stone sculptures, and runic inscriptions facing the sun. This place is not just an archaeological site, but a huge trace of humanity left in the heart of Asia. The Orkan Valley stretches along the river of the same name in central Mongolia, between the Khangai Mountains. From above, it seems like a huge bowl in which steppes, hills, and stone ridges converge. Here, in the midst of space, winds are born, running towards China and Siberia. And it was here, according to archaeologists, that the history of the peoples of the Great Steppe began. Long before Genghis Khan, this valley was home to nomadic tribes who were the first to learn to combine art, faith, and power. The valley preserves traces of dozens of eras. The most ancient monuments date back to the Bronze Age. Stone sculptures with carved figures of deer, the sun, and stylized people. These deer stones stand in rows, facing east, as if they are still greeting the dawn. Their height reaches 3 meters, and engravings are visible on the surface: spirals, bows, daggers, wings. Scientists believe that these are symbols of the transition from life to death, kind of gatekeepers between worlds. Under each such stone, archaeologists find mounds, burial places of nobles or warriors, filled with bronze jewelry, the remains of horses, tools, and amulets. Over the centuries, the Orkhon Valley became the cradle of empires. Here, in the 8th century AD, the capital of the Uyghur Khaganate was erected, Ordu-Balik, City of Kings. All that remained from it were the foundations of walls, traces of towers, and the remains of stone palaces. Later, in the 13th century, a little to the north, in the same place, Karakorum arose, the capital of the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan. Archaeologists find here ceramics, weapons, seals, coins from China and Persia, traces of workshops where blacksmiths and jewelers from dozens of nations worked. But the greatness of these empires is only the top layer. Beneath it lie others, 1,000-year-old ones, on which all subsequent kingdoms were built. Every hill in this valley is part of a mound field. Some of them are small, others reach 30 meters in diameter and several in height. Their structure is striking in its precision. Rings of stone, mounds, even rows of slabs. Such mounds are found not only on the plains, but also on passes, where the wind never stops. And it seems that this wind is the breath of those who rest here. Archaeologists call the Orkhon Valley an open book of steppe history. Here you can trace the change of cultures, from the Bronze Age to medieval empires. Each layer of the earth contains traces of another people. In one place they found arrowheads of the Scythian type. In another, Buddhist figurines. In a third, runic inscriptions in the Old Turkic language. On one of the steles are carved words addressed to the gods of heaven and earth. Their meaning is simple and eternal. A person leaves, but the wind remains. Today, the Orkhon Valley is included in the UNESCO World Heritage List. But unlike most archaeological reserves, there are no fences, ticket booths, or pavilions. The entire space is open air. Shepherds graze cattle among ancient burial sites, children play at the foot of mounds, and archaeologists excavate near yurts. This is a rare place where history and life do not oppose each other, but exist together. Scientists from Mongolia, Russia, Japan, and Germany have been exploring the valley for decades. Using satellite imagery and drones, they compile maps of burial mound fields and analyze the structure of burial grounds and ancient settlements. Some mounds turned out to be more complex than expected. Inside there are stone chambers with false vaults, remains of wooden structures, and traces of horse sacrifices. All this indicates a high level of organization of society long before the advent of writing. But, despite the scientific interest, the main thing in the Orkhon Valley is not archaeology, but the sense of space. It is impossible to separate nature from history here. The evening light falls on the hills so that they seem to be living creatures asleep in the steppe. When the sun sets, the stone steles cast long shadows, and the wind passing between them creates a low hum, like a chant. Local residents believe that the spirits of their ancestors sing and do not argue with the wind. The Orkhon Valley is the heart of Mongolia, where the past is not destroyed but dissolved in the air. There is no need to look for ruins here. They are everywhere. There is no need to dig the ground here. It speaks itself if you listen. And when you stand among the mounds, where the grass sways and the sky seems endless, you realize that time can really stop. not in stone and not in oblivion, but in the breath of the wind that carries across the steppe the whispers of all those who once called this land home. When the wind of the Orcan Valley whispers about eternity, on the other side of the earth time disappears not in sand but in water. On the Suffolk coast, where the gray North Sea crashes against the chalk cliffs, the town of Dunwich once stood. Today, it is almost gone. Only scraps of walls, fragments of cemeteries, rare foundations framed by thickets and cold winds. But in the Middle Ages, Dunwich was a great port, the capital of East Anglia, where life was in full swing, the bells of 12 churches were ringing, and the markets were noisy. Now his streets, his piers, his memory lie under a layer of salty water. All that remains is the shore, slowly crumbling into the sea. The history of Dunwich began in the 7th century A.D. It was then the capital of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of East Anglia and one of the largest ports in Britain. Ships from Scandinavia and Flanders came here, trading in wool, salt, and fish. The city had monasteries, stone temples, and walls that protected the harbor from the winds. But even in the chronicles of those times, there are alarming lines. The sea was approaching. Each storm took a piece of land, carrying away houses and streets, and no one could stop the disaster. The first major destruction occurred in the 12th century when a series of storms changed the course of the River Blyth. The harbor on which the life of the city rested began to silt up, and the sea, on the contrary, deepened the shore. The storm of 1218 destroyed half of Dunwich. People took out the bells, saved the relics, but with each winter they returned to the smaller city. By the 13th century, out of 12 churches, 7 remained, and by the 15th century, 2. By the 18th century, water had swallowed everything. Today, according to archaeologists, almost 90% of the ancient city lies under the sea. The sea at Dunwich is not rough. Its strength lies in its consistency. Winds blowing from the North Sea create slow but inexorable destruction. The slopes are crumbling, the earth is sliding down, houses are collapsing right into the water. Every year the sea reclaims another meter of shore. Scientists call this process silent erosion, but there is something solemn about it, as if nature itself is completing what man started. Archaeologists long believed that Dunwich had disappeared without a trace. But at the beginning of the 21st century, a team of researchers from the University of Southampton carried out underwater scanning of the seabed off the coast. LiDAR images showed the outlines of streets, foundations, even the remains of churches. Among them is the huge tower of St. Nicholas, which once stood in the city center. Now it lies underwater, covered with silt and shells. Stone blocks that once saw sunlight now rest in the shade of algae. This is the first underwater ghost settlement in Britain to be reconstructed using digital models. Locals often say that the sea around Dunwich sounds different. On calm days, when the wind subsides, a low rumble can be heard underwater, like distant bells. Scientists attribute this to the acoustics of waves and terrain features. But for those who live nearby, it is a reminder of a city that no longer exists. On the coast, only the Church of St. James remained, built after the disaster. Her cemetery is on the edge of a cliff. With each passing decade, the wind pushes it closer to the edge, and the graves along the grass line slowly crumble into the sea. Today, Dunwich is a small village with 100 inhabitants. There is a museum here that houses fragments of stone inscriptions, maps, drawings, and rare fragments of mosaics raised from the bottom. Scientists and tourists come here to see a place where history and nature have become one phenomenon. But unlike the ruins, Dunwich does not stand on land. It lives underwater. It is marked on the map, but if you go ashore, you can only see the horizon. This city has become a symbol not only of destruction, but also of eternal presence. In England, they say, Dunwich did not disappear. It simply became part of the sea. And there is truth in this. Every storm that hits the cliff, Every shaft that breaks against the rocks carries with it particles of the ancient city, carrying them into the depths. Water became its continuation, a new body. For historians, Dunwich is a laboratory of time. Here you can observe how nature slowly rewrites history, turning the past into geology. In other places, archaeologists are excavating the earth. Here, they are reading the sea. It keeps the city within itself, but does not allow it to be returned. When you stand on a cliff near an old cemetery, you see not only the landscape. Below, under the waves, the life of another world continues. Fish swim between the columns, seaweed sways in place of the altars, and above the wind carries the smell of salt and dry grass, and everything seems unchanged. Dunwich is not just a ruin, but a slowly disappearing border between man and nature. He reminds that no creation lasts forever, and even a stone can become water. But maybe this is how memory is preserved. Not in walls, not in maps, but in what continues to exist, changing shape. The sea did not destroy Dunwich. It accepted it into itself, as history accepts everything that was once alive. And now, when the waves wash the empty shore, it seems that this is not the end, but an endless breath of time. After all, the city that disappeared underwater did not die. It simply chose a different way to remain. After the crumbling shores of England, where time disappears into the sea, we are transported to the endless plains of northern Iraq, where the hot wind carries sand from the Syrian deserts. It is there that the ruins of Hatra rise, an ancient city whose silence sounds louder than any story. Here, under the sun that never sets, time seems to have stopped. Once upon a time, Hatra was one of the most powerful cities of the East, a center of trade, religion, and military power. But today only walls and columns remain from it. But even they keep the breath of thousands of years. The city arose more than 2,000 years ago, in an era when the world was divided between Rome and Parthia. At the intersection of caravan routes leading from Mesopotamia to Syria and Persia, Hatra quickly turned into a rich oasis. Merchants brought gold, spices, incense, jade, and rare fabrics here. But behind the shopping arcades there was a fortress, a city surrounded by a powerful wall with round towers and gates that could withstand any siege. Archaeologists will later calculate the walls of Hatra stretched for 2 kilometers and were so strong that even the Roman legions could not destroy them. During the time of Emperor Trajan, the Roman army tried to conquer the city, but stumbled upon an invisible force: unity, faith, and walls built with mathematical precision. Decades later, the Romans returned again, under the command of Septimius Severus. They besieged Hatra for weeks, but were never able to break through. The chronicles of that time wrote that the city's defenders were fighting with the spirits of the wind. Perhaps it was just a metaphor, but in this metaphor there was a truth. Hatra stood at the crossroads of civilizations, absorbing their gods and traditions, and itself became something more than just a city. Its temples, discovered by archaeologists in the 20th century, are striking in scale and style. Mesopotamian symbols and Greek ornaments coexist on the reliefs, and the faces of the goddesses are made in an almost Roman manner. In one of the halls they found statues with eyes inlaid with marble and obsidian. They look at the person entering as if time had simply pretended to be dead. Each column here is like the breath of an era that has not disappeared, but has frozen, waiting to be called by name again. When Parthia fell and Persia arose in its place, Hatra was still standing. But nothing lasts forever. And in the 3rd century A.D., the city fell under the onslaught of Shah Shapur. The sand slowly began its conquest. Trade routes changed, wells dried up, and the city that once shone in the sun fell into oblivion. Over the centuries, his name almost disappeared from the chronicles. Only the wind continued to go around its walls, like a guard who did not leave his post. In the 20th century, archaeologists rediscovered Hatra. They cleared temples, domes, vaults, and raised sculptures from the sand that stood motionless for more than 1,500 years. The city came to life, but not for long. In the 21st century, war came here. Fighting and barbaric destruction once again turned Hatra into a field of ruins. It seemed that history was repeating itself, like a mirage. But even then, the ancient stone did not give up. Many temples survived, and the statues, chopped off and burned, retained an expression of eternal calm. Today, Hatra is included in the UNESCO World Heritage List. Scientists are carefully restoring its fragments. Archaeologists are recording every detail, as if they are afraid to disturb the breath of the past. When the sun sets below the horizon, the ruins are painted in a copper light, and it seems as if the city is alive. It just chose silence instead of time. Hatra is a reminder that cities, like people, die not when their walls crumble, but when they are forgotten. But it is impossible to forget Hatra. It stands like a stone mirage among the sands, and preserves the memory of everyone who once believed that they could stop time. And beyond its horizon, where the dunes turn into dry plains, lies another place, a city in which time has stopped differently. There it was not destroyed by war and was not covered by sand. It simply left, leaving streets along which only the wind now walks. After silent cities, where the past froze under the sun, the path goes south, to where the earth itself preserves the memory of eras. On the outskirts of Argentine Patagonia, in the province of Mendoza, one of the most amazing natural mysteries of South America is hidden. Caverna de las Brujas, the Cave of the Witches. Its winding passages stretch deep beneath Mount Monojito, and every meter here is a record of millions of years of geological history. From the outside, the entrance to the cave is barely visible. Among the gray limestone rocks there is a narrow fissure from which comes cool air and the quiet dripping of water. Tourists who get inside for the first time often stop in amazement. Behind a cramped corridor, a hall the height of a 5-story building opens, decorated with stone vaults, stalactites, and stalagmites. Their shapes are similar to candles, columns, and even human figures. This is how the place got its mystical name. The cave was formed during the Jurassic period, when most of what is now Argentina was covered by a shallow sea. Then, 150 million years ago, the limestone layers began to slowly dissolve with water, creating underground voids. Over millions of years, under the influence of underground rivers and dripping moisture, mineral formations grew in them, from thin needles to heavy domes, shiny with moisture. Geologists call such formations living because they continue to grow to this day, just a few millimeters per century. But not only nature has left its mark here. Archaeologists found traces of fires and fragments of tools at the entrance to the cave, evidence that ancient people knew about this place thousands of years ago. Perhaps they used it as a shelter or as a sanctuary. For the ancient inhabitants of Patagonia, darkness has always been a symbol of the transition between worlds. The legends of the indigenous tribes said that water spirits lived under the mountains, guarding the passage to the heart of the earth. The Spanish colonists, having heard these stories, nicknamed the place the Witches' Cave, and this name stuck forever. Explorations of the cave began in the 20th century. In 1940, geologist Alberto Recalde first compiled a map of its halls, marking areas where he could not go due to narrow passages. Later, in the 70s, speleologists came here, and it turned out that the length of the system exceeds 5 kilometers. Most of the passages remain difficult to access. The temperature inside is about 10 degrees, and the humidity is almost 100%. Any careless movement can damage fragile formations that have been formed over millions of years. The most famous hall of the cave is the Salón de las Columnas, the Hall of the Columns. Its ceiling disappears into darkness, and the stone pillars formed by the fusion of stalactites and stalagmites resemble the nave of a Roman temple. The lantern's light reflects off damp surfaces, turning the walls into gold and silver. No artist created this, only water and time. Here you feel especially acutely that in front of you is not just a landscape, but a process that is still ongoing. Scientists from the National University of Cuyo are conducting microfauna studies in the cave. In complete darkness live colonies of rare insects and bacteria that can exist without sunlight, using mineral compounds to generate energy. These organisms help to understand how life could have originated on Earth and where it could exist in similar conditions, for example under the surface of Mars or the icy moons of Jupiter. To preserve the unique microclimate, most of the cave is closed to visitors. Only the first kilometer of the route, equipped with lights and handrails, is open. The guides warn not to touch the walls. A fingerprint can stop the growth of mineral crystals. Every year, hundreds of people come here to see what live time looks like. Many people say that the feeling here is like being in the heart of the planet. You can hear the water dripping, as if the Earth itself is measuring seconds. Local residents carefully preserve the legends about the Witch's Cave. They say that on the darkest night of the year, quiet voices can be heard inside, like the whisper of the wind. Scientists explain this by acoustics. The sounds of drops, reflected from the walls, create vibrations reminiscent of words. But even knowing the explanation, it's hard not to feel that this place lives a special life. Today, Caverna de las Brujas is a national nature reserve. It is under state protection, and any interference is strictly prohibited. Not only tourists come here, but also researchers who want to understand how harmony is born from chaos and darkness. The cave has become a symbol of the slowness of nature, a reminder that the most majestic forms are created not in years, but in eternity. When a person goes outside, the sunlight hurts his eyes, and the wind seems almost hot after the underground cold. But the roar of the cave remains in my memory, the same one that has not stopped for millions of years. It sounds like the breath of the planet, like the music of a stone playing out of time. After the underground labyrinths of Patagonia, where time was kept in stone, the path goes even further, to the very edge of human presence, to where even the air seems alien. Antarctica is the only continent where there are no states or permanent inhabitants, only snow, ice, and stations built by people trying to measure eternity. Among hundreds of such bases, there is one that is hardly talked about. The station, known informally as the time loop, stands on the edge of the Earth, where all the clocks stopped on one day and never went back. Its history begins in the mid-20th century, during the first international expeditions. At that time, Antarctica was an arena of not only scientific, but also political rivalry. Several countries established their bases on the coast, trying to gain a foothold in the icy desert. One of them, built on an unnamed cape in East Antarctica, was supposed to become a temporary point for geophysical observations. The station was named simply, based on its coordinates. In the documents it was listed as temporary, but remained inhabited for almost 20 years. Its wooden buildings, covered with layers of snow, gradually became part of the landscape. In winter, temperatures dropped below 70 degrees. Snowstorms lasted for weeks, and people lived as if in another world. They measured the magnetic field, recorded the movement of ice, took samples of the atmosphere, all in complete isolation. Sometimes supply ships could not break through the ice for months, and then the station turned into a tiny, autonomous universe. But at the end of the 70s, after another winter, the connection with the station was lost. Not a single ship could reach it. The ice moved, changing the coastline. When a new expedition arrived there years later, the buildings were half buried under snow. Inside there were instruments, journals, dishes, even clothes, everything, as if people had just left and never returned. On the calendar in the wardroom there was a date, divorced from time, the 6th of July. Not a single trace of people was found. The archives have preserved little information. Officially, the station was declared abandoned, but its history aroused the interest of scientists, not because of its disappearance, but because of how it was preserved. The frozen air preserved everything: paper, food, even smells. Scientists who examined the place said that time inside seemed to have not passed at all. There were maps on the walls, pencils were not dry, and the clock that had fallen to the floor still showed the same time as it had decades ago. Researchers call such objects climate capsules. Thanks to the complete absence of microbes and low temperature, things do not decompose, but live in their own time. Each item inside the station is a document of the era, not written, but preserved. Among the finds are old tapes with recordings of wind, sounds of snowstorms, even fragments of radio conversations. On one of them, you can hear the operator reading the weather data, and then a crash and silence. This moment became the border between past and present. It later turned out that part of the station fell into a crack under a layer of snow. Perhaps people simply did not have time to get out. But over time, an almost mystical halo grew around this place. Tourists and researchers arriving in Antarctica sometimes report that not far from the coordinates of the station, their instruments begin to behave strangely. Compasses rotate, clocks go off by several minutes. Scientists explain this by the peculiarities of magnetic anomalies, but the symbolism turned out to be too strong, and the nickname time loop was assigned to the station. It is now officially closed. There are no routes going here, and no expedition has the right to stop within a radius of several kilometers, for safety. But satellite images show that the buildings are still standing. Their roofs have collapsed. Their doors are covered with snow, but their outlines are discernible. Among the whiteness of the ice, dark rectangles are the trace of a person left in a place where time has no power. Antarctica is the only continent where the past and present exist literally side by side. Under layers of ice several kilometers thick, air bubbles are stored, trapped tens of thousands of years ago. Scientists are drilling ice cores to read climate history from the chemical composition of the air. Every centimeter of ice is a year. Every crack is an era. Here, time does not move forward. It accumulates like snow, layer by layer. The time loop station has become a symbol of this slow eternity. People tried to measure it with instruments, but in the end, they themselves became part of what was being measured. Their tools became artifacts, and their presence became legend. There is a strange justice in this. Everything that a person builds one day becomes nature. When summer expeditions fly over this stretch of coast, a trail is visible among the silent ice, a dark dot on the endless white. It is not a ruin, not a monument, but rather a reminder. In a world where everything moves faster than ever, there is a place where time has stopped. Not by the will of man, but by the law of cold. And perhaps it is in this silence that the answer lies. Time does not disappear, it just waits until someone tries to measure it again. After icy Antarctica, where time froze in silence, history moves to where the sun and sand became the guardians of the past. In the heart of North Africa, on the slopes of the Ors Highlands, lies a place where ancient Rome seemed to have fallen asleep rather than died. Timgad, a city built for legionnaires almost 2,000 years ago, today looks as if it was abandoned yesterday. No other Roman city has been preserved so completely. Streets, forums, theaters, temples, everything is in its place. Only instead of crowds and laughter, the wind now blows here. Timgad was founded in the 1st century AD by order of Emperor Trajan. The city was intended for veterans of the 3rd Augustan Legion who served in the North African campaigns. This was a reward for service, a piece of land and a house in the new colony. But Trajan conceived not just a settlement, but an ideal Roman city, a symbol of order and civilization in a land where everything was subordinated to the desert. The layout of Timgad reflects military logic. The two main streets, the Cardo and the Decumanus, intersect at right angles, dividing the city into clear squares. This principle would later become the basis for European cities, but here it took shape for the first time. Archaeologists note amazing symmetry. From gate to gate, exactly 600 meters, from the square to the amphitheater, 100 steps. Even wells and baths are located along strict axes, as in the drawing. The city was built from sandstone quarried nearby, and it still seems that the stone retains the warmth of the builder's hands. According to historians, about 15,000 people lived here: artisans, soldiers, priests, merchants, children. The streets were paved with slabs, along which today you can walk, hearing your own echo, as if the steps were repeating someone else's. In the center of the city is the Forum, the heart of Roman life. Here stood statues of emperors, traded, judged, and celebrated. There are inscriptions on the walls. Tim Gad, Trajan's gift to the veterans who defeated the barbarians. And a little further there is a library, one of the few in Africa from the times of the empire. Its ruins still command respect today. Shelves for scrolls, stone benches, a round reading room where the light fell from above like a ray of truth. But the theater makes a special impression. The semicircle, which accommodated 3,000 spectators, is open to the mountains, and when the wind passes through the empty rows, it seems that the applause of time sounds. The stage has preserved ornaments, columns, fragments of bas-reliefs. The breath of ancient art can still be felt here. Scientists have found that on the days of the summer solstice, the first rays of the sun illuminate the scene exactly in the center. This was not accidental, but part of the ritual. The city flourished for almost 3 centuries. Coins were minted here, fountains, temples, and forums were built. But nothing lasts forever. In the 5th century, the Vandals came, then the Byzantines, and later the Arabs. Each left their mark. But Timgad survived until the sands of the Sahara began to advance. Slowly at first, then inexorably. People left their homes to save their property, and the wind blew away the streets. By the 8th century, the city had disappeared under the desert, becoming a mirage. For many centuries, they forgot about him. Only at the end of the 19th century, French archaeologists exploring Algeria came across stone arches peeking out of the sand. Excavations lasted for decades. Layer by layer, the city emerged into the light, as if waking up. When Trajan's triumphal arch appeared from under the sand, the whole world learned about the African Pompeii. But unlike Pompeii, which was destroyed by disaster, Timgad simply fell asleep, and therefore survived as if time had passed him by. Today, the ruins of Timgad are striking in their integrity. From above, you can discern the city plan. The streets intersect like lines on the palm of your hand. The amphitheater and temples stand out like hearts and patterns. The sun, passing over them, slowly changes the color of the stone from ochre to gold, and it seems as if the city lives with the breath of the day. Tourists walk along the same roads as Roman legionaries, and if you close your eyes, you can hear the noise of the market, the smell of oil and wine, the cries of merchants, the laughter of children. All this did not disappear. It simply disappeared into thin air. Archaeologists continue to find amazing details. In one house, there is a mosaic with the image of a mermaid. In another, there is an inscription in Latin, Vive memor leti, live, remembering death. These words contain the philosophy of Timgad. The people who lived here understood the fragility of their world, but continued to build, celebrate, laugh. Maybe that's why their city has survived the centuries. Today, Timgad is protected by UNESCO. The sands no longer threaten it. Barriers have been installed around it to stop the movement of the dunes. But the wind still walks through the streets like an ancient spirit, checking if everything is in place. When the sun sets behind the Ores Ridge, the shadow of the arches falls on the ruins, and the city seems to come to life for a moment. In this silence, the presence of time is felt, not as a destroyer, but as a preserver. Timgad is not just an archaeological site. This is a reminder that even the greatness of an empire can turn into a dream, but this dream is beautiful. Something that cannot be destroyed lives in him. the human desire for order, for beauty, for eternity. And while the sand whispers between the stones, this city continues to live in its own time, calm, golden, and endless. After the sandy ruins of Timgad, where antiquity rests in the silence of the desert, the narrative moves to the sea, to a place where time has not stopped, but began to flow in a special way. On the coast of central Vietnam, between the green hills and azure waves of the South China Sea, lies the city of Hoi An, a living museum where past and present merge into one breath. The story does not end here. It continues every day, in the lamps reflected in the Thu Bon River, in the smell of rice and incense, in the narrow alleys where the sounds of footsteps echo for centuries. Hoi An is one of the rare cities in Asia where the appearance has hardly changed since the Middle Ages. Its streets, houses, temples, and shops have been preserved as they were seen by merchants of the 16th and 17th centuries, when the city was the largest port in the Far East. Then ships from China, Japan, India, Arabia, and Europe flocked here. On the embankment, dozens of languages were spoken. Silk, spices, ceramics, and precious stones were traded. The city was called Phi-Pho, the gateway to Indochina. Archaeological excavations show that a settlement existed here long before the rise of trade. Already in the 2nd century BC, the Sa Huind culture flourished on these shores, leaving behind clay urns, bronze mirrors, and jade jewelry. Later, the place became part of the state of Champa, and then became part of Vietnam. Each layer of history left its mark, creating an amazing fusion of cultures, in architecture, in ornaments, even in food. When Europe opened the route to Asia, Hoi An became the point of contact between the two worlds. The Portuguese and Dutch built trading posts here, and Japanese merchants erected their famous covered bridge, a symbol of the city. Its wooden beams, connecting the two blocks, stand on stone bulls, and, according to legend, the bridge was supposed to pacify the dragon that lives underground and causes earthquakes. At the top of the bridge, there is a small temple dedicated to the protective spirits. From the mid-17th century, Hoi An reached the peak of its power. Warehouses with tea, porcelain, and spices stood in the narrow streets, incense was lit in temples, and anchor chains rattled in the port. But over time, the river began to shallow, the fairway shifted, and ships began to bypass the city. Trade moved to Da Nang, and Hoi An gradually fell into oblivion. However, it was precisely this oblivion that saved him. Neither wars nor industrialization destroyed the ancient quarters. Everything remained as it was. Today, when you enter the old city, it seems that you are stepping into the past. Houses with carved wooden shutters, courtyards, moss-covered tiled roofs. Everything looks untouched. In the evenings, the city is illuminated by thousands of paper lanterns. They are reflected in the water, turning the river into a golden ribbon. The market sells spices, tea, sea salt, and good luck amulets. The air smells of rain and lotus flowers. Scientists note that Hoi An is a rare example of a city where not only architecture but also the rhythm of life has been preserved. There are still craft workshops here where silk fabrics are made by hand, forges where bronze figurines are forged, and wood carving workshops. Even boats on the river are built according to ancient drawings passed down from generation to generation. This is not reconstruction. This is life going on without haste. Archaeologists from Hanoi University have carried out extensive research on old houses in recent years. In the basements, they found Chinese and Japanese ceramics, Arab coins, and Portuguese crosses. All this confirms that Hoi An was not just a trading point, but a cultural hub where East and West first met as equals. Here, what would later be called the global world was formed. Sometimes tourists say that the clocks in Hoi An don't work, and indeed, it is difficult to feel the passage of time here. The day slowly dissolves in the evening glow of lanterns, and the night gives way to dawn, leaving no traces. Local residents say that the city breathes in its own way. In this breathing, one feels a special harmony, a balance between the past and the present, between a person and space. But Hoi An holds not only beauty, but also a warning. Sea levels are rising, and every year the water moves closer to the embankment. Archaeologists and ecologists are creating digital copies of the city to preserve it in the event of a disaster. However, the residents themselves are in no hurry to leave. They believe that it is their duty to protect the memory. After all, as long as they live, the past will not disappear. When the sun sets across the river and lanterns flash in the windows, the city is filled with light, soft, warm, like the breath of centuries. Here, time has not stood still, but flows differently, like a slow stream in which the past is always nearby. This is the secret of Hoi An. He is not afraid of change, because he himself has become the embodiment of what does not change, the human ability to remember. Hoi An is the final touch in the gallery of places where time has stood still. But perhaps it was here that it did not stop at all. It simply learned to live in harmony with eternity.